Hello, and welcome to the PRGX webinar, Managing Your Audit Program in a Crisis. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please submit them using the webinar question box. Also, please check your audio. If you're having trouble hearing us, let us know via the question box. And finally, be sure to follow us on our social channels, Twitter and LinkedIn at PRGX Global. When companies planned for 2020, no one anticipated organizations would have to account for working during a crisis. However, that is where we are now. Today, we're pleased to have Leighton Hammett and Vijay Parekh join us in an open discussion as they share their insight on managing your audit program in a crisis. Leighton Hammett is Director of Delivery for Accounts Payable Audits in the EMEA region for PRGX and brings over 20 years of experience to conducting audits across many sectors and regions. Welcome, Leighton. Vijay Parekh is PRGX's Senior Director of Delivery for Contract Compliance in the EMEA region. He has over 18 years experience conducting audits for large global companies across many sectors. Welcome, Vijay, and thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks, Michelle.
At the start of this, many companies had concerns over how teams and departments would be able to continue to operate efficiently due to not being together to discuss projects. Here, as an organization, we were fortunate to experience a mostly seamless transition to a work from home environment, largely in part because we have access to collaboration platforms like Teams. Leighton and Vijay, can you share a little bit about your personal experience in making that transition with your teams and other departments? Leighton, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, certainly, Michelle. We're fairly fortunate as an organization because all our employees have company laptops. We also have a good IT support network. So where people were transitioning to work from home, any additional hardware equipment that was needed was immediately dispatched to them. As you touched there, we were already using Microsoft Teams, so all the staff were very familiar. Working remotely with many of our clients, we were able to communicate both internally and externally to all our clients. As I said, many of the staff have laptops. Indeed, they have client laptops, either through accessing remote systems through Citrix or VPN. So we were able to continue our day-to-day working quite seamlessly. We had experience that we shared with various country managers, as not everyone was locked down at the same time. So we had some learnings from different PRG employees over the world. We did have one or two bumps along the way. Certainly in the first couple of weeks, many of the staff requested that we communicate more with them, which kind of on the commercial, my side was probably one for me to take note. So we regularly had meetings set up then on a weekly basis. We now have them on a monthly basis, as we didn't realize how long the pandemic was going to continue. In fact, we had one or two staff training issues as well, where we had recruited in January and February. It was a whole new challenge to us to continue the training and share our experiences, whereby from an office environment to an external environment was a little challenging. So I think our takeaway from that was really to communicate more with the teams, and that was great through the Microsoft applications. So it's really good. Thanks. Vijay?
Sure. Hi, Michelle. Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a shift change that, was required, I think, by not just our company, but lots of other organizations out there. But in terms of working with, with our team and across other departments, one key element, that was really helpful was leveraging any of the available sort of, online collaboration tools, some of which Leighton mentioned, like, Teams and WebEx and, Cisco sort of client and that sort of stuff. But, in terms of like other items like, file sharing, sort of applications like OneDrive or Microsoft Notes, were really sort of key and helpful in, being able to collaborate and work across, teams remotely. It's all in practical terms, where we had physical meetings scheduled for the office, these had to be converted to conference calls, and so that was like sort of a defined specific effort that we had to put in place, to make those. We continued with that communication and we stayed sort of closely joined up as a team. Some personnel were already working from home, sort of part office based, part home based. I guess for those, the shift was easier, to work from home, sort of more, as a permanent sort of measure. But for others where they didn't have the, the home equipment set up, I think, our IT were really instrumental and helpful in getting equipment set up, things basic such as headphones or, to sort of screens and, whatever else is required to, get people operating. I suppose, unfortunately, there's still no noise cancelling option for, when a dog seems to bark when you're on a call. But, hey, we can live in hope and hopefully the technology will get better, as that practices. So,
Sure.
yeah, back to you, Michelle.
Sure. And Leighton, you touched on this a little bit. So, how did it affect your collaboration with clients making this transition?
To be perfectly honest, it was very smooth because we work a lot remotely with our clients, and indeed some of our clients actually work from home 1 or 2 days a week as well. So the transition over to working with them was very, very smooth. I suppose our quarterly review meetings, we just changed to 100% virtual, which everyone collaborated in, and it's almost business as usual.
Mm-hmm.
We did notice with some of the overseas shared service centres, they were a little slow in responding, and indeed when they started the work from home process, it took a little longer. Mm-hmm. And likewise with some suppliers, the setups for some companies took longer. But on the whole, people, were very tolerant, people were very patient, and really everyone was in the same boat, that everyone was facing the same situation. So we almost came closer to both suppliers and clients because there was that mutual talking point. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's, I think, I'm sure VJ had the same experiences within the contract compliance arena as well.
Yeah, we did, Leighton. So I mean, at the start of the year, I guess, we took for granted almost the collaboration part of, the in-person meeting with our clients, and a lot of that sort of conversation or interaction would happen dynamically as you're in that same environment. So, at the start of this year, we had a number of audit projects which were scheduled for a kickoff during Q1 and Q2 of this year, and across lots of different geographies, like the US, India, and Singapore. But obviously, as the situation was sort of developing and changing with the COVID and with restrictions coming into force, a lot of these meetings were getting cancelled, obviously for good reason. So what we had to do in those cases, we had to set up meetings obviously virtually, but in order to support that sort of delivery via the online platforms, we had to create templates to help us navigate and guide our clients through those conversations. So that really helped. So the team sort of pulled together. We shared the ideas in terms of what do we need to do in terms of sharing the information during the kickoff calls, and traditionally what we would deliver sort of in person, we'd always had to sort of draft up and develop new material and content for. So but that was good. As I said, it would require again the team pulled together, but also where we needed to, we tailored that for different clients. So if there's anything specific for that audit program or for that client, we were quickly to react and adapt to that. So so that's kind of how we maintain the collaboration, I'd guess.
Very good. So VJ, do you feel that companies, considered or had considered or even realized kind of the impact to their business and what it would be because of a disruption in their supply chains?
Mm-hmm. So it's a good question. I mean, we obviously work with a number of different clients in lots of different industry verticals and sectors. But particularly in terms of disruption to the supply chain, our manufacturing clients were probably more exposed to this than others. So what we were noticing around November, December time of 2019, they were keeping a close track of how the virus situation was developing within particularly the APAC regions, where it was sort of emanating from, and nobody knew really to what quite extent this was to have an impact on their supply chain. But one of the things we became aware of was that some of the organisations were stockpiling, sort of raw material type ingredients, things that had a long shelf life to ensure that they could maintain production within their facilities. And where possible, they were starting to work more closely with other suppliers where perhaps they didn't have a long shelf life of products, things like fresh produce, for example. So I think in general, obviously demand planning, and supply chain planning isn't a new concept for many organisations. But one of the things that we noticed really is with the speed at which the virus was taking hold meant that the business had to react, in equal amounts or speed, if you like, to minimise the disruption on their business. And additional efforts on putting contingency plans into place were also important as well. So again, these are things that business as usual, you wouldn't really see or think about these things maybe as your number one priority, but certainly as the virus and the pandemic was sort of progressing, that was one of the things that a lot of companies were doing.
Do you have any suggestions that you would offer up for companies who experience disruptions?
So I guess, yeah, I mean, as mentioned, as the sort of virus was sort of migrating across the globe, what we found were different countries were reacting differently, to the pandemic. But one thing was clear, like us, many companies were having to ask employees to work from home. So in terms of suggestions, where organisations were used to having large centralised teams working in location, in this sort of centralised location like a BPO, suddenly, they were having to maintain the same service levels remotely. So what that meant, that created a huge demand in technology and the adoption of new ways of working, which some companies had to establish, sort of a disaster recovery plan or a business continuity plan, etc. And others, maybe didn't have that in place, so there was a lot of sort of reactionary type of work. I guess from a suggestion, from a contractual, sort of perspective, what we were hearing from procurement functions, they were having to set up almost like a SWAT team, to identify critical vendors, for their supply chain, to seek out what provisions, that existed within, their contract terms and conditions. Again, one of those things that was never the forefront, but now with the pandemic and having to, ensure supply chain is maintained, they need to, ensure that their suppliers were fully able and set up to, continue in the business. So as a suggestion, maybe, consider that, if your organization is, or hasn't reviewed contracts, maybe, reviewing contracts is now a good time, either as a specific project, to identify business continuity or disaster recovery plans, or establish a, contract compliance type program where one of the outputs or the objectives would be to, even if it's a simple check, just to say, does the contract include a business continuity provision in place? And if it doesn't, you can mark those contracts out and put measures in place to try and keep that going, basically. So that's what I can suggest. So, thanks, Michelle.
Great. And Leighton, so if an organization already were to have an audit program in place, are there any other suggestions you would offer that they consider to potentially add to their programs?
Well, we've certainly seen over the last couple of years the introduction of working closer behind the transaction. The industry normal now is 90 days behind the transaction. Now that has certainly helped reduce the risk of suppliers defaulting. That's one area we've been advocating with clients that currently are older than that 90-day period. Mm-hmm. We've also run recently a number of debit balance reports and investigated debit balances where clients have had debit balances on a back burner, but all of a sudden they've come to the forefront because there's a massive risk element there. Additionally, we've run some pricing audits, which again, where companies now are looking for additional revenues, and only for process improvements and And additionally, we've run some DPO analytics, which is days payment. Now that analysis looks at potential improvements for cash flow and working capital. Mm-hmm. So there are a number of things that we can put in place. I mean, one of the areas we were speaking to a client not that long ago was in the hospitality region, where we'd received a statement of accounts, and there was a large deposit which was made back in April for a convention in August. Now, that wasn't going to take effect, but our concerns was that if they continued the way we're going, would that hospitality company still be in existence in maybe 6 months' time if the pandemic continues? So we recovered that money for our client, and then the client had actually gone back and looked at the whole area of hospitality, down payments, deposits, etc., because they saw that as a risk for themselves. Mm-hmm. So there's areas like this that we've come into really since the pandemic. Thanks.
And you touched on auditing closer to a transaction. How does that benefit the company?
Well, working closer to the transaction, basically the resolution of errors becomes much quicker. Mm-hmm. There's less chance of supplier abrasion, in that vendors can deal with the error far more quickly because the accounts are more current, rather than going into historical ledgers or historical data. In fact, there's two advantages from this. Certainly, the money comes back to the business far quicker. And also, if there are process improvements to be made, then we can suggest these in real time, as opposed to, some 6, 9, a year later even. Thanks.
Very good. So for both of you, are there other considerations or suggestions that you'd offer up to remain diligent and focused during this time?
Yeah, certainly. One that I would suggest is that clients look at their suppliers as a risk performance basis. I think they would also, one thing that we've suggested with suppliers, and they are doing more and more, is client, shall I say, is talking to their suppliers, trying to ascertain if they have any pain points or if they're suffering through the lack of resources through the pandemic. And certainly working with them, I think is a real bonus, and actually talking to them on a regular basis and sharing that information, it certainly reduces the risk for all of our clients.
Mm-hmm. And BJ, any?
Yeah, I guess, I'd add to that by saying, like many of our clients, we've had, varying levels of disruption during the pandemic, and, sort of managing, the audit program through that. And then, having to, I think it's, important to stay regularly connected through, QBRs, setting realistic, timelines on projects, that you're kicking off, working with suppliers and giving them flexibility to provide, the data or support during the audit, I think is really key as well. Again, we're all in this together, and, sort of think, being mindful and flexible, I think is really important. I suppose as the times are still sort of uncertain ahead, it's probably important more than ever before to be aware where your risks and exposures lie from a contractual perspective, not only from a financial sort of standpoint, but also from a logistical standpoint. Your suppliers being able to maintain their supply chains, or even just as simple as Leighton mentioned, staying in business, through this pandemic. So, I think the key message there is that staying communicable, with your suppliers and the supply chain is really key. I suppose, adopting a holistic contract compliance and assurance program can somewhat help to manage that going forward, to identify any sort of risks and exposures. And if there are any sort of value leakages, within those supply relationships, then it's probably better to know about those now rather than, for the event to occur and then, sort of be at a loss, so to speak. So.
Okay. And through all of this, or even maybe more at the start, I'm sure there were some factors that maybe led to seeing reduction in performance. Have you seen that, or is it now picking up? Or
Yeah, I mean, it's inevitable, that there was probably, some sort of performance, sort of shortfalls or drops, if you like, sort of minor drops. And I suppose, whilst we're experiencing, the change in our working practice, there was probably a lot more focus on business critical processes or, events really, or deliverables. But I think as we've now somewhat sort of stabilized over the time period and people have got more used to working, in this sort of current, working environment, I think those kind of shortfalls or drops in performances are either caught up, if you like. And I think where required, I think, through collaboration and companies working together, supplier, customer, targets perhaps may have been reset, just to make them more sort of realistic and, having the, bearing the situation that we're all in, and bearing that in mind, I suppose. So yeah, I think, it's always, yes, performance is always a key target, to ensure and maintain. But, as, we're all in this together, I think we have to kind of be sensitive to that and, drive up performance where we can.
Great. Well, I thank you both. This has been great information. And we did get a couple of questions. So let me see. VJ, this might be a good one for you. What is the level of cooperation or willingness from suppliers to be audited since the pandemic?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, the level of cooperation and willingness, I mean, I suppose, without the pandemic, it's all being in play, you could probably be more forceful in, sort of applying your, contractual audit rights, against suppliers to say, we want you to provide this data within this time frame, etc. But certainly, in our experience, where we've, kicked off audit programs for some of our clients, again, on their suppliers, they've got great relationships with these suppliers, and they've been very amenable to having this audit because they understand, like, it's a contractual obligation, and what we've done, and with our clients is to listen to any challenges that they're facing, in providing that support or that data, and then adjusting timelines and timescales accordingly. Obviously still being realistic and making sure things are achievable, but certainly there is still an opportunity out. A lot of suppliers are still willing, and cooperative. So, and I guess where they're not, it's not always the ideal situation. We perhaps postpone that, or agree a point in time in the future when we can come back and maybe revisit it and see if it's the right time for them at that point. So it's about working together. So yeah.
Great, Leighton. This might be good for you with because you deal kind of on the commercial side of things. Have you seen a decline or an uptick in business since the pandemic started?
Actually, quite the reverse. I think more and more clients are looking at ways really to recover lost cash. I mean, at the moment, cash is king. Mm-hmm. All our clients really are facing issues somewhere or other. So therefore, they're looking to companies like PRGX that has the full range of services that can come back and look for cash to recover. And indeed, it doesn't come just with cash back on the table. It comes with root cause analysis, process improvements, and it may be system enhancements that are recommended. So the AP business, we've started several new audits in the last couple of months. And because AP works on a contingency basis, there's no risk to the client. Everything's a bonus. It's a great health check for any business. So, really, why wouldn't you have one is the answer.
Great. So, I think that's really all the time that we have today for some questions, but I just wanted to thank everyone again for attending our conversation today, and also thank you to Leighton and VJ for your time and your great answers and to our Q&A. As a reminder, this recording will be added to the PRGX website along with other on-demand webinars. We also have some additional webinars scheduled over the next few months, including one, Leighton, you kind of touched on this about shared services centers and how they've been affected during this time. We have an upcoming webinar at the end of the month related to that. And you can find information about those webinars on our website as well at prgx.com in the resources section. If you'd like to know more about recovery audit or contract compliance, or to speak with a PRGX expert, if you'll visit our website again at prgx.com. Thanks again and have a great day.
Thanks.